So, what happens when a policy decision made way up in Washington, D.C. sends a shockwave through a small town and cuts off what might be its only lifeline? Today, we're digging into that exact story and seeing how communities get left to pick up the pieces. We're going to start in Pound, a tiny town of about 900 people tucked away in the mountains of southwestern Virginia. It's a place that, like a lot of towns in Appalachia, has its roots deep in the coal industry. But recently, it found itself right in the middle of a very different, very public fight. That's Pound's Vice Mayor, Leah Byrne Kennedy. And that feeling she described, that stomach drop moment, that was her reaction when she found out that a critical lifeline for her town had just been yanked away at the absolute worst possible moment. To really get that sinking feeling, you have to understand the threat that's basically become a constant for this community. See, Pound's geography is its biggest challenge. The town is literally in a valley, wrapped by rivers and streams that overflow anytime there's a heavy rain. And those heavy rains, they've been coming more and more. We're talking 3 major, devastating floods in just the last 3 years. The latest one, back in February 2025, dumped 7 inches of rain, completely washing out roads, ruining homes, and forcing them to declare a state of emergency. But right before that last flood hit, there was this incredible glimmer of hope. Back in 2023, the town found out it was set to get $500,000 from a federal grant. This money was specifically for helping old coal communities solve some of their most urgent environmental problems. And the local officials, they did not mess around. They got to work right away, drafting a plan. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Build a riverwalk that would double as a buffer to soak up floodwaters. And at the same time, they'd bring back native plants to the riverbanks to stop erosion. It was a real boots-on-the-ground, practical solution. And then the rug was pulled out from under them. Just as the town was literally trying to clean up from that February flood, they got the news the federal government was revoking the grant. Just like that, the money was gone. Now, Pound's story is just gut-wrenching. But what happened there? It wasn't some random one-off event. It was actually just one small piece of a much, much bigger policy shift happening across the entire country. It all kicked off on January 21st, 2025. That's when President Trump signed a new executive order aimed at ending programs connected to DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. That order specifically tore up an old Clinton-era rule that was the entire basis for federal environmental justice programs. Then, exactly 1 month later, the EPA started sending out the termination letters for grants just like the one Pounds was counting on. And the scale of this is just massive. We're talking about roughly 350 projects that had their funding canceled. That's about $2.4 billion with a B that Congress had already approved. And on top of that, another $560 million that was set aside never even got sent out. So this whole firestorm really centers on this term, environmental justice. What does EJ actually mean, and how did it suddenly get so controversial? Well, for decades, the EPA's own definition was pretty straightforward. Environmental justice, or EJ, was about making sure all people had fair treatment and a real say in environmental policy. The goal was to protect everyone, especially communities that have historically been hit hardest by pollution. That definition, by the way, you won't find it on the EPA's website anymore. And this is where you see this huge disconnect. The administration argued that these EJ grants were basically a sneaky way to fund left-wing activists and were all about race. But when you look at how the grants were actually given out, the criteria were way broader. The government's own screening tool looked at things like income, leftover pollution from old industries, high energy costs, and climate risks. So let's bring it all back to Virginia, because this is where you can really see that high-level Washington debate just slam into local reality. And here's the twist in the story. Pound is in Wise County, a county that is over 90% white, and politically, it's deeply conservative. 81% of the county voted for President Trump in 2024. So this kind of flips the whole official rationale for cutting the funding on its head. So you have to ask, why did Wise County qualify for an environmental justice grant? Well, it had nothing to do with race. It was about a whole cocktail of economic and historical problems. The government's own screening tool flagged the area as disadvantaged because of things like crushing energy bills, pollution left over from the coal industry, low incomes, and low high school graduation rates. And that left local leaders like Vice Mayor Kennedy just feeling completely baffled and honestly stereotyped. From her perspective, whoever made the call in Washington didn't do their homework. They just saw a political buzzword, environmental justice, and made a decision without ever looking at the real people and real problems the money was supposed to help.
But this story isn't over just because a check got canceled. No. For communities like Pound, a new chapter is just beginning. The fight to get that support back.
Now the battle is moving into the courts. Groups are suing, arguing that a president can't just single-handedly cancel a program that Congress already paid for. And they're actually having some success. A few grants have been restored, like one in West Virginia that's now being used to deal with forever chemicals. The fight is also political. Pound's own congressman, a Republican, has gone on record asking the EPA to find another way to fund what he called these meritorious projects. And maybe this quote here from Dana Kuhnlein of Reimagine Appalachia really gets to the heart of it all. For the people on the ground, this isn't about politics or labels. Call it environmental justice, call it community development, call it whatever you want. They feel they deserve support now that the industry that powered a nation is gone. And for them, that should be a pretty uncontroversial idea. In the end, the story of Pound, Virginia really exposes this huge chasm between the political labels that get thrown around in Washington and the real, tangible needs of communities on the ground. And it leaves us all with a pretty critical question. When those two things collide, who gets to decide what and who is worth funding?